welcome back to my channel, or if you're new, welcome to my channel. My name is Mackenzie, and today we're going to be discussing the many deaths and strange disappearances that have happened on I-80. Now, we're going to be discussing quite a few different cases that are more specific, and then there's some that don't have really a lot of information and quite a bit of unknown bodies. There have been over 500 bodies found on I-80. We're obviously not going to discuss them all. We're only going to be discussing a select few, and so I'm very sorry if you guys get bored throughout this. These are people's lives, and I'm just trying to share their story in hopes to bring them justice. Thank you guys for watching, and go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and let's jump into it. So let's first discuss I-80 as an interstate. It goes from San Francisco, California to Teaneck, New Jersey, and that's about 2,902 miles, and it was constructed during 1956 to 1986, so about 50 years ago is when they started the construction. And it's called the Big Lonely because when you're going through, especially the western parts, there is hours and hours of nothing. It's pretty deserty over here, so that makes a lot of sense. The FBI has even designated a task force specifically for I-80 and all of the disappearances and murders on it through Utah, Northern Nevada, and Northern California, which is really scary that there's that many that the FBI has to have its own thing about it. There's more than 500 bodies that have been found along I-80, which is absurd, and shockingly, but not so shockingly, they are mostly all found on the West Coast. So today we're going to be discussing a couple of the individual cases from the I-80. We're going to discuss a couple of the killers that have been found from I-80, and we're going to talk about the unknowns as well. So first, let's start off with the case of Nan Dixon. Nan was 73 years old, and she went missing on September 21st of 1978. She was driving from Grass Valley, California to Seven Trails, Nevada. She was going there to see her brother because she had originally agreed to do this gold mining business with him and had given him about $6,000 in cash for it. And then she decided that she wasn't into that or didn't want to do that anymore, so she came to come get the money back from him, and that's why she was going out here. But she was last seen at the Texaco in Lovelock, Nevada, and Lovelock is kind of the middle of nowhere. It takes about an hour on either side of Lovelock to get to another town, so it's pretty nowhere. And they know that she was there because there was a charge on her credit card for $4.18. And from here she vanished. The area was searched by a lot of people. People were coming around all over to try and look for Nan, including her family, and they didn't find anything for a long time. It wasn't until 1982 that some hunters were going around the mountains and stuff, or parked off on the side of the road, and they came across a yellowish green 1976 Datsun B210 in a desert ravine. Now, the desert ravines are kind of all over. It's just where like water used to be, or it's just like a trench of some sort, and I'm not really sure why a lot of them are there, but it was down in there, and it was almost to the Seven Trails turnoff. She was almost there when something must have gone wrong, and it was very weird because she still had a half tank of gas, and this area specifically had been searched during everything. So it seemed as if her car had been driven off the road later on purpose to try and hide it, to try to conceal it from others. And there was a few strange things that were within the car. There were 4 empty packs of cigarettes, but although Nan smoked, she didn't smoke this brand, and smokers tend to stick to the one brand that they really like, so that was a little bit weird, and that is a lot to also smoke on a 3-hour drive. Then there was also black electrical tape with a bunch of hair stuck to it, blood stains on a trunk mat and tire rim, and a crumpled up note which read the following: "Keeps telling me to use my gun and end my nightmare, but this I'll never do, for God gives life, only God can take life. Committing suicide is the unpardonable sin, and I will never be." Was this a suicide note? I mean, to me it seems like it was something that she might have been contemplating, but in the end she decided no, because she, was a believer in God, and she didn't want to disappoint God, and she wanted to make sure she got to heaven. And no body was ever found of Nan Dixon, no bones. There is a few theories with Nan. that either she crashed and wandered off to find help and died in the desert, which doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, because if you crashed and you were good enough to wander off, I would think that you would stay to the freeway, because that is a very well-traveled freeway, and so somebody would have been able to help or call 911 for you. So to just follow off into the desert doesn't make sense to me. Or she came across one of these serial killers that terrorized I-80 itself. And another weird thing about Nan Dixon's case is that her vehicle ended up being sold at auction very soon after it was found. So all evidence was gone. I never saw that they tested the blood or anything like that. So that's all very weird. Personally, I think something suspicious happened there, because for the car to be there and then not be there and there's no body or anything, the desert's pretty flat until you get out to the mountains, and she was an old lady. I don't think she was going to be able to get that far, so that is the first case. Then we have the case of Barbara Louise Nichols. It was 1988, and she worked at the gas station in Carlin, Nevada, and she was robbed, abducted, and shot, and her body was found on the side of I-80, and they never figured out who did it. It wasn't the same kind of time where there was security cameras all around. Then there was also Johnson White. Johnson White went missing in 1992 from Winnemucca, Nevada, which is my hometown. He was last seen by a neighbor, and he was driving his sedan. His vehicle was found abandoned with items that belonged to one of the neighbors in it, which is really, really weird, but his body was never found. Then there's the case of Judith Cassida. I'm sorry, I can't say that well. I sometimes get a lisp. And she was 62 years old and went missing on Valentine's Day of 2006. Now, Judith had just written a note to her husband saying that she was unhappy and leaving him, and took off. And so we already know she was in not a good state of mind. She may have been crying or something, and a little bit out there, because we all know that when very traumatic things like this happen, that you are not yourself in any way. Even if it was your choice to leave, like, that's still going to hurt your heart because of having to make that choice. He didn't know where she was going, or nobody knows where she was going, but it's suspected that she was going up to Oregon to see her family, but had to cut through on I-80, and she was in a 1991 Mazda pickup truck. She was last seen at the McDonald's in Lovelock, Nevada. The area between Lovelock and Winnemucca has like the most cases in it, and it's kind of scary. But it was in March of 2006, so a month later, that her truck was found in the desert, and it was on a dirt road off of Pumpernickel Valley exit. It's exit 205, and it's near Winnemucca. Her truck was found there, and there was no injury to the truck. The truck had almost a full tank of gas in it, and there was no signs of a struggle, and only one set of footprints heading towards I-80. So it was almost as if Judith had pulled her truck off to the side of the road, and for some reason, like down this dirt road that she would not have been familiar with, and decided to get out and walk to the freeway, which doesn't make sense too, because her truck had no injury. It started right up when they tried to see if there was something wrong with the truck, any reason for her to stop, and there wasn't. It's so weird that she stopped when she didn't need to. And she was never seen or heard from again. No body, nothing. Then there's the case of Patrick Carnes. It was February 13th of 2011 when this 86-year-old military vet went missing. He was going from Toledo, Ohio, back home to Reno, Nevada, and he had just previously been visiting family. And he had his dog Lucky with him, which was this big Akita, super beautiful dog. I'm very surprised, first of all, that he made this sort of drive on his own. Not only is that a really long way to drive, but at his age and to be alone is a little scary, and I'm surprised his family let that happen. It was 9 p.m. when he was last seen, and he was seen near Wells, Nevada by Highway Patrol, and they had stopped him because he was following a semi-truck, and then when it got pulled over for something, he wouldn't get over, so that he came too close to the truck and the cop, and so the cop was like, that's not right, you're not supposed to do that, you're supposed to get over a lane, everybody knows. And so the cop actually pulled him over for this, and Patrick said this to the cop. He said, "I'll never drive at night again. I'm only following him because he's going to Elko." And it was just kind of, didn't make sense. Like, he was following the truck because he was scared, which I kind of understand. I try to stay behind cars too at night because of the possibility of a deer or a horse jumping out. It's terrible to say. I'd rather hit that car than my car. But the cop gave him a warning and allowed Patrick to keep going. And then 9 hours later, his green Subaru was found 150 miles away at Pumpernickel Valley, exit 205, near Winnemucca, Nevada. The car had plenty of gas, no damage, and Patrick and his dog were gone. His car was found on the south side of the road, so it meant that if Patrick is, they'll say like this is Nevada, and like here's like the little part of it that goes like that, like here's Reno. So he's driving across like this, and then where his car is found, he had turned around to go back the other way. And so that again didn't make sense because he had a map and everything was listed out where he would stop for gas, where he'd stop to let the dog like go potty and everything, and that was not on his map at all, so there was no reason for him to stop. A very extensive search for Patrick was done, and they went through the mines and everything in the area, and there was no trace, not even footprints, and so they don't really know what happened to Patrick or his dog Lucky. The cops' cameras were gone through hoping to find something, and directly behind Patrick, the last time his car was seen on camera, was a semi-truck, and it was the only other car on the road at the time that had passed through this cop's camera. And there's a blurry symbol on the side of the truck that they've never been able to identify, and the truck driver himself has never come forward to say he had seen Patrick or that this was his truck and that they had nothing to do with it. Hundreds of leads have come through in the years, but not one has led anywhere. The theory is that Patrick and Judith were both killed by the same serial killers because they had very similar endings. Just their car was totally fine, stopped in the middle of nowhere. How the people got them to stop, I'm not sure, and it's off the same exact exit, so that's also very, very weird. Next we get to the case of Joseph Bushland. It was May 8th of 2011 when the 26-year-old Army soldier borrowed a Mitsubishi Lancer and drove off of Dugway Proving Ground. He was in distress and he called a friend saying that he'd run out of grass and that he needed help, and he was on the west side of Granite Mountain. And that was the last time he had been seen or heard from. It took 6 days for them to find his vehicle, and it was 64 miles away from where he said he was, and the iPod and GPS were still in the car. And back in 2011 it wasn't so popular to be having smartphones and stuff, so the iPod would have probably been closer to what he had as a smartphone, but that was in the car, but the keys weren't. And the reason it took so long for them to find the car as well is because it had slid off the road into one of the ravines, and there were no footprints or anything leading away from the car, but there had been a recent rain, so that's what they think washed away the footprints. So they had no idea which way he had walked, and there was no activity on his phone or in his bank or anything, and he has never been found and never seen again. Now we're going to get into the unknowns. Now, I'm obviously not going over every single case because there's hundreds and hundreds of cases, but the unknowns to me are pretty important, and I don't think that people realize how many Jane and John Does there are just in the States alone. There are thousands of them, and you can actually do a part to help that. There is something called the Doe Project and the Jane Project and things like that, where you can actually submit your DNA and they will try to use it to match up with one of the Jane or John Does, and they've actually found quite a bit of people's like who they are by discovering their parents or their sibling, who these people just thought they just kind of disappeared and never saw their report or their drawings or anything like that. So if you can, that'd be really great to help, because who knows if you have a second cousin that's missing that you don't even know about. That would be so big to be able to bring those kind of people to justice, to bring them to peace, to lay their bodies to rest properly. The first unknown is in July of 1972. It was a female in her early 20s, and she was found off the Star Valley exit 343. She was naked and murdered and posed like she was on a cross and shot with a .22. The next female was in 1972 as well, and just north of I-80 on Wells on Old Highway 93. She was strangled and set on fire with diesel fuel to try to get rid of her body. In 1972, we had another female that was found on Devil Fate Road north of Elko, and her cause of death was unknown. Just her body was found in the bushes. In 1978, there was a female that was found that was 40 to 50 years old off the Imlay exit, and she was in a duffel bag in a shallow grave about, she was in a duffel bag in a shallow grave about 40 feet off of the road, and she had $200 cash in her pocket. So obviously the people weren't trying to rob her, they wanted to kill her for something else, and I'm not really sure how her body happened to be come across. Maybe someone smelt it or something nearby, or got out and smelt it, but that's where her body was found. In February of 1990, there was a female in about her 30s near I-80 Hilltop Road. She had been dismembered, and several pieces of her, including bones of her torso, have never been found. So it is possible that when she was dismembered, they did throw all the pieces out, but maybe an animal or something had taken parts of them. Really gross and terrible to think of. In 1990, a elderly woman was found mummified and lying under sagebrush near Wendover. And to mummify someone is a big thing. It takes a lot of work and knowledge. Someone definitely did that on purpose, and she had never been identified or killer found. In 1991, there was a 50-year-old male found in Sun Valley, Nevada, and he was decomposing underneath a mattress and a sheet of metal, which we all know what that looks like. I mean, I've seen it a million times when you're driving down the road and there's just kind of trash on the side of the freeway. So they just put his body under it and put this stuff on top and hoped no one would flip it, and it took a while for someone to, and so his cause of death is unknown. He was pretty poorly decayed by the time they had found his body. On the 16th of November, 1993, a female was found off of Schaefer exit, was naked, beaten, killed with a small caliber gun, and was again posed like a cross. Now those two killings are linked, and we'll get into it in a bit. April 30th of 2015, a body was found in a suitcase off of I-80 by a construction worker. And it was like, you know how the freeway has like those pits on the side of it? It was down in the pits, and this construction worker was just like walking during his lunch, you know, getting a breather, probably eating a sandwich, whatnot, and he smelt this terrible smell, and so he noticed the suitcase and immediately called the police, and him and the cop opened the suitcase together, and within it was a woman who was very smashed into the case, probably very broken, and it had been there for several months. Now, they believe that the woman is a missing woman from Vegas, and I hadn't seen any confirmation if it was or not. She had a mastectomy on her right breast and a pink cancer ribbon tattooed on her left wrist. I hope that it was her, and I never saw anything more about it. Now let's get into the killers. There's only 2 killers who have ever been found in all of these cases. Over 500 cases, and we went over, I think, probably about 20, and only 2 killers were ever found. The first one is Keith Jefferson. He was a trucker that worked for Cheney Wash trucking firm from Canada, and he was being investigated for 8 deaths since 1990, and so 2 of his killings were the nude women in the cross position, and then he was also guilty of the murder of Julie Ann Winningham, which he wasn't found on I-80, but he was still being convicted of it. It was his girlfriend, and he had like taped her mouth shut and strangled and raped her and then just threw her body off the road. And he admitting to assaulting more than the 8 that he killed, which means that he could have had a way of figuring out how to make these people stop, and then did what he did to them, and sometimes they got away and sometimes they didn't. And then there's the case of Jeremiah Bean, which is more recent, and I didn't really discuss any of his murders because they're very weird and I felt like it should just be discussed right here. Jeremiah Bean was 27 when he killed 5 people in May of 2013. He killed all 5 people in one weekend, which is insane. He murdered 2 elderly couples. The first one was Bob and Dorothy Pape, and he killed Bob and Dorothy Pape while in their home. He described the murders in full detail to the officers, and it is gruesome and terrible what he did to these people. And he even recorded one of the murders, it hasn't been released which, on his cell phone, which is fucking horrible. He said he killed Bob and Dorothy because it was Friday and he needed cash. How fucking pathetic. And so after killing them, he bought heroin with the money and items that he had stolen from him and went out and partied. It didn't even faze him that he had just murdered 2 people. Jeremiah was in a gang in Fernley, Nevada, and so many people from his gang had then gone to Bob and Dorothy's house and just continued to steal from them and pretty much just threw their bodies underneath piles of clothes and didn't even think about them until, you know, eventually he was caught. Then later the next day, he was going out to see a prostitute in Mustang off, and this is when he killed his next victim. He killed Eleazar, I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, Graham, after flagging him down because Eleazar was probably thinking he was helping out this guy, and so Jeremiah had stolen a truck from Bob and Dorothy, crashed it, flagged down Eleazar to help him, and then shot Eleazar and stole his truck and drove back home to Fernley. Again, very terrible. And then once he got back home to Fernley, he killed Angie Duff and Lester Lieber while attempting to also rob them. And he was very forthcoming throughout his entire trial and didn't try to hide anything, was very honest and open, which is very nice for the family. And he has been sentenced to death. Everything else in this video is unsolved, and that is insane. So I know most of these cases were a very long time ago, but if you do have any information, always call 911 and report it, or go to Secret Witness and report it there if you do not want to be identified in any way. Thank you guys so much for watching, and make sure you subscribe and like the video. I hope you guys learned a lot today, and I'll see you guys next time.